The Agriculture Department says the deal with Saudi Arabia on the protocol for red meat exports will improve global food security. The Saudi Arabian government visited Agriculture Minister Thoko Didiza yesterday following the signing of the agreement 4 months ago. The red meat industry services welcomed the move, saying Saudi Arabia is a high market for so-called prime and high-value cuts such as fillet, rump and sirloin. Well, to unpack this further, we are joined by Wandile Sihlobo, who is advisor to the Agriculture Minister. Mr. Sihlobo, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I think initial thoughts at the beginning of this deal, my immediate thoughts is something that is very good for South Africa's economy. Yours?
Yeah, absolutely. It is positive for South Africa. But I think what's more important is even the discussions for yesterday, because they were looking at saying how do you strengthen trade between the two countries in agricultural products, but also how do you advance investments, tapping into whatever resources that Saudi may have on and utilizing those for farming and expanding further within South Africa and the agro-processing opportunities. And I think discussions around all of that is really positive, and that's what South African agriculture and, of course, the economy at large needs.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk a little bit about just how much we will be then exporting and trading with Saudi Arabia where red meat is concerned. Let's talk about some of those figures.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing, Naledi, that we have to always appreciate is that when you look at where we're sitting right now, just last year, for example, 2023, South Africa's agriculture exported about a record $13.2 billion, which was up 3% from a prior year. That's 2022. And of course, then much of that was concentrated in Europe, in Africa, in much of Asia. With everything that is happening in many countries where there's a rise in protectionism, it's always important to diversify and look at other markets, and while trying to retain the existing one. And Saudi is certainly a big agricultural market, because if you look at how much they spend on agricultural imports each year, they import agricultural products worth about $20 billion. So yes, South Africa for now is talking to them, looking at the red meat industry, looking at the grain industry and sugar industry. But I think over time, we will have to say, okay, on the fruit side, what is it that you are getting from the world? Is there a possibility that you could get some of that from South Africa? Because as a country, we are in any way in an ambition of saying, how do we broaden our export markets? Because with what we send to the world today, that $13.2 billion is half of what we produce. So if we're looking at any increase in production, we'll have to have more export markets.
Yeah, that's it. You know what I find very interesting is obviously we talk about these massive opportunities that the agricultural space has globally. And I'm speaking about the South African agricultural space. And yet this deal being struck even though we have this foot and mouth disease challenge. So how are we managing to get around some of those issues when previously it has been seen that perhaps some of our products are of an inferior quality?
I think the foot and mouth disease is always an issue for any other country when it comes to livestock. But South Africa is known to be a country that has supreme capabilities when it comes to agricultural production, and we're able to manage now the diseases. It's not like we had it and we were overpowered by the disease. It had just spread a lot last year, but I think it has now come under control. And what we have been able to assure, of course, the Saudi was showing them our biosecurity capabilities and the improvements that both the private sector and the governments are making, which is why we're talking about Saudi Arabia. But last year, we're also talking about China having accepted our beef. That is in recognition of the biosecurity capabilities that we're putting in place, as well as, of course, the quality of the product that South African farmers are producing.
Okay, so let's talk about the impact of this and what it has, not just on farmers. Perhaps let's start with farmers, right? The impact on what this has on farmers back home. I think naturally you'd think if you're a large-scale farmer, this is exciting news. You've got a new market that you're tapping into. Are we seeing that business trickle down to some of the small-scale farmers and domestic farmers?
So the idea is this, Naledi. If you think of let's take red meat.
Right.
The Saudis are spending in the meat market in general about $2 billion a year importing it from countries like Brazil, Canada, the US, you see those are the countries that are participating in that export market. Now, if South Africa manages to get a slice of that and we're able to export as we will following all of these developments that we've had with Saudi, then of course that is positive for the red meat industry. Those feedlots that are approved to be able to export onto that. You're dealing with biologicals here. There's certain feedlots that will have to be approved on the process and feed specification of Saudi. But the broader point is that if there are any exports out of South Africa, you tend to see that lifting up the price of a product to an extent which is beneficial for all farmers, not only those that are producing, because if there's a demand for that product and the prices is up, even if my product is not the one that goes to Saudi, I still benefit. That is all to say, this is for the benefit of everyone that is in the livestock industry, either you are a small, medium scale or large scale farming. If there's a demand for that product, it's always bound to have a positive price effect for the producer.
Well, that sounds great for the producer, not so great for the consumer of red meat then in the country, right?
Not necessarily. Price adjustments is something that happens naturally. It doesn't mean that we could export ourselves into inflation. You have to export so that the producer can be able to cover the cost. But the minute there is some bit of sensitivity on the prices, that is quickly detected. But most importantly, there are certain cuts that these people need, and then there's certain cuts that you would see that South Africans prefer. So we're not driving the export as a way to create inflation. That's certainly not. Domestic food security is always priority. And I think what we are exporting is some of the surplus that is already there.
Okay.
I made the point earlier that we send out half of what we produce, which just tells you about the surplus that is there in the South African farming. Okay,
and I see here that it's a high market for prime and high value cuts like fillet, rump and sirloin. So South Africans are not so big on rump, but we more the chuck and short rib kinds of eaters. So I'm trying to find the difference, right? How we ensure that we protect South Africans against the inflation as a result of higher exports.
I think then, Naledi, that's not something you could worry on. Since early 2000s, we've been seeing growth in our exports, and we've had years where food inflation was at comfortable levels in South Africa.
Yeah.
In the recent years where food inflation was a challenge, certainly in 2021, 22, 23, was largely driven by the global factors rather than the export activity of South Africa. So we can rest assured then that the consumer is always priority. And as our industry becomes more vibrant and grows for exports, there will also be sufficient cuts for the domestic market, and then we'll remain with the stable food security conditions in South Africa.
And as advisor to the Agricultural Minister, other opportunities that you're scouting for then in the agricultural space for South Africa to start tapping into some of those global markets or expand global markets?
Yeah, I think primarily, Naledi, because I have responsibilities also within the private sector at the Agricultural Business Chamber, and the ambition of AGBIS members is that we have to be looking at widening our export markets beyond the countries that we are in. Saudi Arabia is certainly one of those, and we want to deepen trade also in India and the likes of China, while at the same time retaining their access in the Americas, in the EU, and certainly within the African countries where there are also certain frictions. That message then that the Chamber expresses is certainly aligned with what the ministry under Minister Didiza is also looking at doing. So there is a proper alignment between the Minister Didiza as well as the business in as far as advancing agricultural exports in the world market.
Sounds like the agricultural sector in South Africa trying to do a geopolitical balancing act, but let's leave it there. Wandile, we really do appreciate your time, and we'll be talking some more as well. Wandile Sihlobo is advisor to the Agricultural Minister.